Lord, we are grateful to come here and gather together to study a portion of your scriptures. Help it take root into our hearts and in our lives, and to continue to grow and be seen in the outpouring of fruitfulness in your spirit. Lord, we just pray for those who can't be here today and that are unable to make it. Pray that they would be healthy and be able to be back with us soon. We pray for Crystal and her upcoming travels to Texas, that that'd be a good, fruitful visit, and that she'd return to us safely. I pray for Jan, his friend's brother's passing. Just pray that he can continue to encourage his friend, and that their family would find comfort in this sad time. We pray for Sister Paulette as well, her recent passing, that we could continue to encourage and uplift Jan as he's experiencing these losses. We pray for Trevor and his tooth. We pray for healing there, and that the dentist would be able to crown that tooth and he'd be able to use it again very soon. We pray for our class as we're putting all these things into practice. We pray for Crystal's new meditation habit, that she would continue to practice that as best as she can, and that it would be fruitful in ways, to encourage her to stick with it. That's your will. And for Bobby, as he continues his study habits and tries to sharpen those and seeing the larger picture and your story and your hand and all these things, especially in the strange stories that we see, like Jonah, to understand who you are and who we are in relation to you. Lord, we just pray for all of us as we continue to put these habits into practice, that we would make a commitment to to build them slow and steady for the long run into eternity. And it's in your Son's name, Jesus, we pray these things. Amen.
Amen.
So, our last month of study is here, and we're going to go February all the way to the first week in March. So it's kind of a weird quarter because it has 12 weeks in these 3 months, because February is weird. So we're going to do the first week in March will be this class as well, and we'll switch to our next class, which I haven't yet decided what we're studying yet. If you have input, let me know if you think that we need to study something in particular. We're going to try to follow the Lamplighters pattern, so that would be Acts is the book that we focus on, but also the topics of baptism and communion and the spread of the good news and the early church. So those are all kind of in mind. So if you have something in that area or something else, we can branch out as well. But we like to align all of our classes so that they're all reinforcing each other, so that the children downstairs are kind of studying the same kind of stuff that we're studying up here, and so we can all be in these conversations over meal times and whatnot. So this week we're going to be studying charity. We're actually going to be studying charity for 2 weeks. We're going to study it this week, and then we're going to study it next week as well. And then this month we're focused on charity, simplicity, and service as the 3 disciplines that we'll be looking at. We're going to reserve the last week, so that week in March, as a week of kind of like planning for the future. And so we'll think about all these habits that we've been looking at, all these disciplines that we've been looking at, and trying to like put a good plan together for the next few years to say, I'm especially lacking in this area, and so I need to focus on this for a few months. And then, after I can get that under my belt, I plan for 3 to 6 months to get that habit really established and firm, and I'll move on to this next area, which maybe is my second most important need. And then, obviously that plan can change and flex, and hopefully it'll just be a good time to set us up for success for the future in incorporating a lot of these habits and patterns into our lives. So today we're going to be looking at charity, and first we're just going to take a look at charity in the Old Testament and what that looked like under the Old Covenant. And then we're going to see how Jesus kind of takes and transforms that for his new covenant. And then we'll discuss how to incorporate that as a daily practice, and think about how we can practice some of these things as homework this So to start with, we're going to get into the Old Testament. What are some, when I say charity in the Old Testament, what are some things that come to mind for you? What are some practices that you know of from the Old Covenant that were charitable?
Feeding the corners of your field on harvest day.
Awesome, yeah. If you turn over to Leviticus 19, 9 to 10, that was my first example, is this often called the gleaning law. It's found in several places in the Torah. This is where it's found in Leviticus. And so it says, now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. Nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God. And so this is part of the Torah. And what do we know about the Torah? How is the Torah meant to be read and understood and followed?
It's the law.
Like, is it the same as our, like, WAC, 43 dot, whatever, like, is it the same kind of law that when we think about the word law?
I'm sorry, tell me that again. What
Is,
did you say?
so you said it's the law. I was asking, is it the same kind of law that we have today in like the Washington Administrative Code, the WAC, like all those kinds of things?
I don't think so. Originally, there was the Ten Commandments. I know the first four are like to God, and the other six are for man.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get to the New Testament, the Pharisees, whatever, they took 10 laws to 613 laws.
Yeah, so if you count up every explicit command in the Torah, there's 613 of those. And part of what the Pharisees were doing is they're trying to make sure that they observe every single one of these laws. And my question is that the right way of looking at the Torah? Remember, Torah means instruction. We often translate it as law. But it's kind of this wisdom literature that God has given to his people. And so what's the right way to read and understand the Torah?
Its intention was to give examples so you could understand the principles of how God wanted us to live. So some make very explicit instruction, but overall, when you read it, it would be like, okay, this is the way I'm supposed to treat people or animals or whatever it was. So,
Yeah, the word that I like to use, I think the closest parallel to our own, the way we think about law is case law. And so if you know about case law, you can read, some judge decided on a case, Franklin versus Washington State. You can read that case, and it was decided that they're going to do it this way. And that's an example. And so when future judges are trying to make decisions, they'll look at case law. They'll say, okay, this judge decided this for this reason. This isn't the same situation, but it applies for, in these two areas. And so I'm going to make a decision based on this, plus, the other case law I've read, plus the actual law, the codes. And so I think it's a close parallel, because Torah isn't meant to be followed like statutory law, right? Statutory law is our Washington Administrative Code, the federal codes, all these bodies that we have. They write out exactly what is against the law and what you can't do or what you can do, and they make it very clear. And so if you were to do something like that, and then you got arrested and you got taken to court, you would have a lawyer that would say, well, he didn't actually violate this, because this law says you can only have you can have a sprinkler set up 20 feet from the border. His was 21 feet, so technically he's not in violation of the law. And the judge would say, yeah, according to our statutory law, you're right. The person who measured it was wrong, and this, that, and the other. But if you are thinking about this as case law, it's like, what's the wise and righteous and right thing to do? if the law is meant to say you shouldn't have sprinklers close to your neighbor's border, and maybe your sprinkler is 21 feet away, but it's like on top of a hill, so it's shooting, your stuff. You know what I'm saying? This is a weird example, but the point that I'm trying to make is that these laws aren't meant to be explicit, like do this and you're good, and if your situation isn't covered by one of these 613 laws, then go wild. It's more of like wisdom literature, right? I'm reading all these things and I'm thinking about them all and how they affect each other, and so that's what allows Paul later in the New Testament to cite laws about oxen and to say, do you think this is just about oxen? Of course not. It's for our wisdom. It's for us, and so you won't muzzle an ox while he treads at the grain, because you would reward that, and that's not just for your oxen, that's for your workers in the church as well. And so he's trying to help us understand that this is what God's kingdom is supposed to look like. This is what God's kingdom servants are. This is how they're supposed to live. And so the only caveat that I would say, Bobby, is that this law isn't for us. This law was for God's kingdom at the time, right? So we as Gentiles, or our ancestors or whatever, wouldn't have been part of this group. It was for them. But now God's kingdom has expanded to bring us into it. And so now I think the wisdom can be applied for our understanding, for our instruction, without necessarily bringing all of it on board, because there's so many things that were meant to basically preserve the Israelites as a people. And now that the Messiah has come, we don't need to do that stuff anymore. Yeah.
Could the review of the law have been contorted in that they had something of a flat view of the law where everything was of equal value? When Jesus condemns the Pharisees, he says, you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, but you neglect the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness.
Yeah, and I think that's one of their problems is there's a debate about what's the most important law, right? What's the most important command? And so Jesus tells them what the most important command is, and the second, which is like it. And he says that all of them, like there is a hierarchy of law, and that if your interpretation is messing with this hierarchy, then you've got it wrong, and you need to reconfigure, because I'm the future king. I'm the one who's setting up this kingdom how I want it to be.
And then Crystal's going through the Sermon on the Mount, and then he says, but I tell you, and there's all of that too, to understand it.
Yeah, and I think part of that is that Jesus is now taking the Torah and he is interpreting it for his disciples and for his new covenant and for this new kingdom that is at hand, which he says. And so for them to enter into that kingdom and to be a part of that kingdom, they have to understand that their old interpretation, the old ways, has to change because of Jesus' work and what he's doing now. And so it isn't that I'm abolishing it, right? He says, I'm not abolishing it, I'm fulfilling it. I'm the one that all this was pointing to all along. And so now we're doing something different and new. And we see that continued through Acts as Jesus continues to work in the church and we bring Gentiles in. So they're trying to figure out, well, we have all these laws about being kosher and separate and apart, and it's clear that it's like, well, these Gentiles are being brought in. It's okay for these Jewish people to continue their practices, but they can't force that onto people that were never a part of that covenant. And so, it becomes a little bit more complicated, but it's still wisdom. And so, yes, sorry, this was all a deviation from our Leviticus 19, 9 to 10, thinking about the law and this gleaning. So, sorry, well, go ahead.
Just real quick, so the part in Leviticus is more of God at that time wanted us with free will instead of free will following him and these guidelines or examples of how to live instead of more of the rigid laws that the Jewish people took upon themselves and inflicted upon everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that'd be a good way to say it, because you think about like, even the command not to covet. Like, how do you enforce a no coveting law, right? It doesn't make sense. You have to enter into that free will. You have to take that onto yourself, that I'm not going to behave or act or think this way. And so all that, yes, I think that's the right way to think about it. And so what does it mean not to glean the edges of your field if we're thinking about law in this way? What would that mean in your daily life?
Today, modern day,
Or for them in those days? Is it literally just this law that says, don't harvest to the edges, and then you check that box, move on to the next law? What's the next one? Don't swear falsely. Okay.
I think a good example would probably be, first thing that comes to my mind in modern day would be like whenever we have our meetings and a bunch of people bring food, you bring that food for other people. So in a sense, it would be like if someone wants to take some home with them, you would let them rather than be like, no, all leftovers are mine, I'm gonna take it home.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. It's just a generous mindset, trying to bring more than you need for yourself, your family, trying to bring extra for others. Any other ideas? What else this might mean?
all through the Old Testament and the New Testament as well, it says to take care of the widows, the orphans, the sojourners, the poor, and the oppressed. And the one time they chastised Jesus about the perfume, he's like, the poor are always going to be here. So even today in modern times, it's doing God's work to take care of the oppressed.
Yeah. So this is a law that's meant to affect your behavior to benefit others who don't have as much as you. Right? And so, could this apply to somebody who doesn't own land? Who doesn't own land? Yeah, Levites didn't own land. Well, technically they managed. They got cities, so they got portions of land, but they didn't have their own territory. But if I'm a hired hand, like, does this law apply to me? Not to reap through the edges of my field.
It applies to everyone.
How so?
Everyone is given, by the providence of God, what they have for themselves and to share.
Mhm.
So that, the more you give, the more you get back. I just, yeah. So they need to, or all of us, if we're looking at them in that time, they need to imitate the landowner
Mm-hmm.
and to be like him and help the brotherhood,
Mhm.
their people.
Yeah.
And it's just a daily reminder because it's a visual as well as an understanding of why we're living that way right there. You
Mhm.
see it every day, these are people and they often help or help more share.
Yeah, and really it's to think about like my resources, right? If I have a acre of land that I'm responsible for, this is explicitly about how I'm to manage that land, right? Center is for me and for my family to do with what we want, what we need to do, and the outsides are for the margin, right? And this is like a very literal picture, right? Like there's people that are sitting on the margin of our culture, of our community. They don't have enough to get by. Bad times hit. Who knows why they're there? Maybe they made some bad choices. That is for them. It's not for you. It's for them. And so whether I own that land or whether I'm a hired hand, I have a set of resources that I have, right? And the center of it's for me, and the margin is for those that are on the margin. And there's always somebody, like if you go to anybody, it's like there's always somebody a little bit worse off than you. You could play that game, 1,000 different ways. And so this is meant to shape me in who I am and how I go about my day because I'm supposed to leave the margin. And for me, I'm so often guilty of like not leaving the margin, right? It's like, if you look at my schedule any given day, it's like, I didn't leave any margin today for anybody else except for me and mine. My family's taken care of, and I filled up every second, and nobody feels comfortable calling me because they know I'm so busy, right? And maybe I make that known, or maybe it's just pretty clear that I'm too busy to help anybody, and that's a problem. And so I think working on charity is first and foremost this kind of idea that you're trying to leave margin, you're trying to leave extra, you're trying to create that, or just subsist on less so that you have more margin. You say no more, or you don't take as much, or you do less with it. Valerie?
Well, I was just thinking when you were talking about the margin, and those that think, oh, maybe I'm too busy because they know I'm always busy. But you always know who you can go to that always says yes, who's always there to help. So, that person who opens up their margins would be known as someone who would help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, in any community, you know who Boaz is, right? You know whose field you'll be safe in, and who you know who's leaving the margin, right? And so.
God gave Boaz enough to do that,
Mhm.
just like he gave all of us enough.
Right. And that's kind of, I think, the point is that you always have enough to do that, right? And yeah, it's almost all it's all in your mind. And if you feel like you don't have enough and you're scrambling to get more, then it's like, well, that's a you problem, right? It's something that you need to figure out. Why is this the case? You know, where are your priorities set at?
So in a perfect world where this law was followed by everybody, nobody would have those savings, it seems like in those silos. Because like the people
Interesting.
feel that's like their income.
Hmm.
Any excess was given to you by God, and he's saying you owe it to those who don't have it. So you essentially give it away, and therefore you give away all of your excess. So there'd be no savings, no silos, no, what's the word?
Yeah, so if this was the only law, then I think that would be true. But there are 613 laws. There's a whole body of laws, and part of it is to think about this law in relation to the law of the Sabbath year, right? And the Sabbath year says, yeah, every 7 years you need to not plant, and you're just going to harvest whatever grows up in your field. So stuff will grow, right? If you don't plant in your field, especially if you're leaving stuff for the poor, and you're leaving the edges, like stuff will grow, not as much, but you're supposed to be saving, you're supposed to be planning, preparing for that time. Yeah, and then also tithing, like all these Old Testament laws are meant to be working with one another, and so the wise person would be meditating on these things, right? They'd be thinking about how this plays into that, and this is that, and then hopefully, especially in light of Jesus and his wisdom, we'd say, okay, so the most important thing I can do is love God, and to love my neighbor as myself, and so that means that I need to potentially, have this savings, but not think about it as my stuff. And then I also want to get into kind of how Jesus reinterprets that in a minute, but go ahead, Jan.
On what Sister Crystal said, that's noble, but where you went, there were famines,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to have silos filled with food. And then the Jubilee, the 7th year, the 6th year have stash. And wasn't there also one in the 7 years, like in the middle, where they weren't allowed to till and plant, or let the land refurbish itself, and everything that grew during that time, the poor could have?
Yeah, it's hard to cover all these things in a class, because all of it's related to Sabbath, and it's related to working, and it's related to charity, and it's related to justice, and all these things that are trying to manage Let's turn to Sermon on the Mount, because I think Jesus actually addresses quite a few of these kinds of things. Yeah. And it's not to say that you're thinking the wrong way or anything like that. I would rather say it like I think that's the benefit of meditating and thinking on one little piece is like, well, if this was just the thing, then yeah, we wouldn't save and we wouldn't, every minute would just be, living in this exact moment and giving everything we have away. Yeah.
Just really quickly, I know you want to move on, but just like sometimes looking at this contrast helps understand. And like Jesus spoke very specifically about the rich man. Luke said, oh, look at all the riches I have, so I'm going to tear down my barn and build bigger. Save it all for me. It's just the opposite of what, we then are to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've been spending quite a lot of time in Matthew 6, so we're just going to read that portion. So again, the central portion that we've been focused on starts out with charity. And so he says, beware practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise you'll have no reward with your Father who is in heaven, right? And that's been the drumbeat for each of these disciplines. It says, so when you give to the poor, so when you give to the poor, right? We've focused on that for each of these, right? So Jesus is assuming that you are giving to the poor. He's assuming that you're being charitable. Do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. When you pray, it goes on, when you pray, right? Okay, so several important things, right? We have that we are not to make this known and make it clear to everybody. Look at me, look at what I'm doing. This is supposed to be done in secret. And if it's not, then the reward that we get, you do get a reward, right? You get a reward. You are known as a charitable person, and that is worth something, right? It's worth having a good name and people knowing you and that you're a charitable guy and all these things. But you don't get this reward from your Father who is in heaven. Okay? So keep that in mind. Then we're going to come down to chapter 6, verse 19, rather. So we get through these three things, right? So we have the charity, we have prayer, we have fasting, and it's talking about these rewards that we'll get if we do these things in secret and if we are doing them in the way that Jesus tells us. And so verse 19 says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so, I think that these things are all related, right? This treasure which is in heaven, it's the same reward that Jesus is talking about earlier in the passages that he was just talking about. And so, how does charity, prayer, and fasting build up a reward in heaven?
All those things kind of make you reject yourself in one way or another. Like if you're fasting, you're rejecting your own body's urges. If you're praying, you're rejecting your own reliance on yourself. And when you're giving to charity, you're rejecting, I guess, the urge to hoard.
Mm-hmm.
Keep what's yours.
Yep.
So in that way, I guess the Heavenly Father, the creator of everything good, will reward you for not being essentially selfish.
Okay. I like it. What is the reward for fasting? Like a heavenly reward. become more like Jesus, right? When you fast, you learn to discipline your hungers and your body, all these urges and all these desires that you have, and you become more like God's Son. And so the heavenly reward, it's a future and present reward. It's a storehouse of riches that you can access now and in the future. And so as temptations come, it's like you could store up you could store up food in an earthly way, right? By eating it, by hoarding it, and by keeping it. But that's temporary, and it's not actually contributing to God's kingdom. Whereas if you're giving these things away, and if you're fasting, and if you're following these practices that Jesus is telling us to, he's assuming that we're doing, and you're doing it in this way, then you're building up these heavenly treasures, right? And so for charity, you're building up this habit of thinking about your possessions and thinking about the things that God has given you as not your own, but as something that's temporarily with you so that you can give it to others, whether it's your family or to people that are on the margin in your community, people who are in need. You can give those things away.
Could you say that children naturally imitate their parents, and God is pleased when his children attempt to imitate him? After all, he's the self-deprivation God who's deprived himself so much glory and so much honor in an effort to reach out to us.
Yes. Yep. And I would say that that's absolutely right, that we are meant to imitate and follow him in his example that he's set for us and his son and for others that are trying to become like him. And I think that holds true. I know that holds true even in our own families, that your children are becoming like you, whether you like it or not. And really the only thing that you can do is to try to become more like Christ, and they'll try to become more like you. And so it's hard to make them do anything. It's hard to make them be something, because really they're just going to continue to imitate and be more like you, which is a frightening prospect as you think about what kind of responsibility that is, but also a heartening one when you realize that you can put these things into practice, that you can grow and change, and that they'll see those things and say, oh, Mom was like this, but now she's like this. Dad used to do these things, but now he does these things. And I can grow and change, and I want those things for my family one day too. So we're out of time. This week, couple options at the bottom for homework if you want to start practicing some charity on like a daily basis. The question I want to leave you with is, do you, when you're practicing charity, do you do that off the top, right? Is this the creme de la creme of all that you have? This is the idea of the first fruits, the Feast of the First Fruits, or the Festival of the First Fruits. They would take the first basket of their harvest and they would bring it and offer that to God. And why that matters is because there's no supermarkets that have brought in avocados from Brazil last week, right? There's this food right here in front of us. Everything else has been pickled or dried or salted since, for the last 4 months, because we haven't had anything fresh. The first thing that goes to God, right? And what you really want to do when you have fresh food and you haven't had fresh food in a while is just to eat it all yourself. And so, in the same way, when we're thinking about charity, when we're thinking about giving, do we give off the top, or do we give the scrapings in the bottom, what's left over, when we're thinking about giving it away, either to God or to people around us that need those things?
Does it matter in light of the cleaning law of Leviticus?
It's a good question. Yeah, and really what I would say is like, how is your planning mindset, right? Is it I'm going to take as much as I need, and then whatever's left over, that's the edges? Or I'm trying to plan my life such that there's margin because I know that is needed for certain things. And yeah, so next week we're actually going to talk about budgeting. It's kind of a boring topic. We're going to talk about how charity and budgeting and discipline are all these kind of related things. And then for the next 2 weeks, we'll talk about simplicity and service as related disciplines, and how we can benefit, our community would benefit if we all lived a little bit more simpler, if we lived a little bit more in service, and we were all better with our money. I think that those disciplines, while they seem like not super spiritual disciplines, I think they actually are in a lot of ways. And we're going to talk about next week. So